Welcome to the HBTVS podcast. I'm your host, William, and joining me will be Sean.
Hello.
And Derek.
Hello.
And we are now officially part of the problem. As you can see, there are Christmas decorations out, and it's not even December.
Oh, yeah. November 1st, you start putting Christmas decorations up. Out of the shots of tree.
I couldn't tell what you had, so I was going to bring my skull to put a Santa hat on it, but I thought maybe you would have something. But, you just got X-Men. Uh-oh.
I got Noob Sabot, too.
Yeah,
so
okay.
He's kind of bloody.
Well, I'll bring a skull over if we record over here again before, and we could at least put a Santa Claus hat on it.
They have a decapitated snowman behind you, too.
Where?
Okay.
Yeah. Decapitated. They decapit his tata. But yeah, so on this episode, we'll be discussing California, the 1993 film that has David Duchovny, Brad Pitt, and Juliette Lewis. It's on, if you're in the United States, it's on Amazon Prime currently. This is a movie I've seen.
Michelle Forbes, too.
Michelle Forbes.
Don't leave her out.
Yeah. I was just trying to think of people that everybody knows.
She was great in it, though, I thought.
She is.
She was good.
Yeah, she's good.
90s. If you look at a 90s woman personified, that's what it is.
Well, too, so this movie, like I said, we'll probably discuss spoilers throughout because there's not a bunch of spoilers. I mean, the premise kind of gives you everything you need to know to begin with. But it was released in 1993, and a lot of people kind of lump it in the wave of post-Silence of the Lambs serial killer films. But this has started production like 89 with the script being written and submitted and trying to get it off the ground. So this started before Silence of the Lambs was released.
The movie, though, could have been inspired by the book. You know what I mean? Right?
Well, the Thomas Harris novels.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Because Manhunter came out in the 80s and didn't really do that well. But in terms of just the overall story and all that stuff, the movie itself wasn't a direct... I mean, it getting the green light and finally going to production could have been a response to that.
Oh, I'm sure it probably helped.
The script and everything had been in process, the movie had been in development before Silence of the Lambs came out. So, a lot of times you have movies... Because what was it? The Illusionist and The Prestige came out at the same time, which are the movies about magic in the real world and stuff like that. So a lot of times...
My dad was confounded that they were making... Observer Report and Paul Blart at the same time as well.
And two, there was Deep Impact and Armageddon.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of movies where you kind of have these two ideas that are basically the same come out at the same time. But just and this was 1993, so this was right around when the X-Files had started for David Duchovny. So he wasn't a big household name yet because the X-Files. What's funny is the ratings the X-Files got in its first few seasons would make it one of the top 3 shows on TV today. But back then, it was, getting 20 million viewers a week was pretty bottom of the barrel and almost getting canceled.
Yeah, but it's funny. I mean, what would even be competing against that?
Well, because back in that era, you had fewer cable television channels. Netflix didn't exist. Video games were not the national pastime they are today. You didn't have, YouTube, and you didn't have smartphones.
So this movie came out when?
93.
Okay, so Red Shoe Diaries premiered in 92 also. You forgot about that for David Duchovny.
Oh, okay.
Did you watch any of that? He was basically the host. You remember Red Shoe Diaries? Yeah, it was basically a softcore porn show on HBO, I think. And he was the host. It would always start out and he would have a diary and he would be talking about it and then it would go into the porn story. He hosted that.
Well, he had been on
92 to 99. I don't know if he was in the whole run.
He was on Twin Peaks as Dennis Bryson before that too.
Yes, yeah.
Not that was in the second season when it wasn't quite as popular, but so that was before he was really a household name because I think the X-Files took a couple of years of its run to really kind of pick up steam and become the cult favorite, underground cultural hit that it became. And Brad Pitt, so this was pre-Seven and all the Ocean's movies of the late 90s, 2000s, all that stuff. So he was a star that was on the rise, but once again, not a super household name yet.
But you can still see he is a very good actor at the time. He was pretty good in it, which is funny. Is that his character in this isn't that much different than maybe his character from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
I think that
they both live in trailer parks.
I see what you're saying.
With Cliff,
apparently, he was in a TV movie with Juliette Lewis before this, where they played similar characters as well.
Well, it's just funny you can see because while I was watching that, you just see a lot of the similarities because it's
he's
not
almost
the same.
A lot of times he's blue collared. You know what I mean? Just what was I going to think of the other film he was in with Inglourious Bastards. Like, you know what I mean? It's almost like a blue.
I was gonna say he's kind of like so Aldo Rain from Inglourious Bastards, so he gets to do the Southern accent again. So the basic story to this movie, California, is that David Duchovny and Michelle Forbes. He's a writer. She's a photographer. They're going to go on a road trip across the country, visiting the locations of serial killers, murders, and she'll take pictures and he'll write a book about it, and they'll use her pictures and write a book and all that stuff. And they're looking for 2 people to do a rideshare with them and to help split the cost of them going on this trip across the country, which is kind of a foreign concept to anybody from today's world, that you would just put up a bulletin somewhere to do a ride share.
Because like you would Craigslist that, or when you hear on, like the only difference between then and now is like you'd put that on some type of internet service, somebody would respond, and then you could go do a deep dive.
Well, when you hear rideshare now, you think of Lyft, Uber, all the services. You don't think about actually just sharing a ride with someone.
I was saying, it's just funny when you think about it in terms of the day, though. Like, if this would, they couldn't do this set now because like you could very easily go like, oh, what's your name? Go type them up and then find most of the information.
Well, because the idea of this is David Duchovny and Michelle Forbes, they're kind of yuppie, educated, elite, writers, photographer, kind of just yuppies. And then Brad Pitt and Juliette Lewis are kind of redneck. So Brad Pitt's just kind of a redneck type guy, and Juliette Lewis is somebody that, without being, the character has low IQ.
She's a slower individual.
Developmental issues probably that
she is somebody that is perfect for Brad Pitt's characters, so he can exploit.
Yeah, so she plays this very sweet young woman that is easily manipulated and controlled. And this was before From Dusk Till Dawn, right?
I think that was 95, I believe.
So she played younger, because in this they described her as being 25. And then From Dusk Till Dawn, she plays a teen.
And then Natural
Born
Killers was what? Slightly after that?
Which is what I was going to bring up, is because that, again's not that much different.
94.
Because they're pretty similar, too.
Yeah, that was 94
she was in
Natural Born
Cape Fear,
Killers.
91. Cape Fear is awesome. Have you all seen that?
Yeah, I've seen Cape Fear.
And then, of course, Christmas Vacation in 89.
Yeah, so I think at the time Brad Pitt and Juliette Lewis were dating when this movie was made. So it said that they would do rehearsals on their spare time in between shooting.
You could see that they put in the work, Well,
because
So first of all, let's back up. What made you pick this movie? You picked this film.
I had
hardly even heard
So I had seen this on TV over a decade ago, and just remembered it being a movie I didn't see many people talking about. That was kind of for it to have the cast that it did, to not be talked about that much seems kind of odd. But I think it's all because at the time they're all kind of on the precipice of becoming bigger stars and not quite there yet. And when the movie came out, it didn't do very well at the box office and then just kind of got buried. So it's a movie I think, being on cable over the years, more people picked up and kind of came to. And then now being on Amazon Prime and streaming stuff, I'm sure it'll pick up more people watching just because of the people involved. Well, but I just remember it being it was just funny because it's a big star turn for David Duchovny, because there was a while where he was actively seeking out leading roles in feature films because was it Evolution? Wasn't that Ivan Reitman that directed it or
maybe.
Or
this is more of a comedy movie, wasn't it?
Yeah, because it also had Orlando Jones and
which I also remember the trailers for that movie because he has a little creature driving down his leg.
It's Ivan Reitman directed it. So, same director as Ghostbusters, but so that was an attempt. But then he did. He was in what's the Ben Stiller movie? Zoolander. But then he got the series on Showtime that ran for forever, Californication. And then the X-Files came back. So, he's had a good career. It's just there was a while where he was really going to be a, leading actor in a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then you just wonder, had this movie came out a year later when people had more heat on him, would it have had a better performance at the box office?
Maybe, but I don't think his performance is that good in this film. I don't think David Duchovny.
I think he's just kind of.
He was the most wooden.
Yeah.
And I think that the narration, I did not like the voiceover narration. I thought that was.
Well, I think some of this movie, like when you watch it comes back to the reason why you maybe think he did a good performance or was adequate in it because we just like David Duchovny.
Yes, I really like him.
You go back and you're like, oh, okay, his performance really wasn't that good. I just liked him. But then you look at like the people I think shined more in the movie were probably Brad Pitt and Juliette Lewis.
Yeah.
Well, because Brad Pitt is doing, so this was when he was like early on in his career and been the Pretty Boy and stuff. And he's like, well, I want to do something that's different than what I've done to show I have more range. So I want to do something that's not, something darker or something with more grit to it. And this definitely had that because he played the redneck pretty convincingly. And two, the movie starts out set in Louisville, which is where we're at. But they didn't shoot it here.
Yeah, but they never come out and straight up say it.
No, it's just implied because they have the Kentucky license plates and there's a university. So, there's different towns that have universities, but for it to have the downtown buildings and stuff they have, that meant that was either Louisville or Lexington.
Yeah.
And I think it was Louisville, but it wasn't a big part of it. The idea was just that
they started in Kentucky and they went west.
Yeah, that they started out in Kentucky and they were going to these different spots as they went to Texas and California.
One thing I didn't do any due diligence on when they were looking at the murders, was any of this based on actual murders or just stuff they made up? Because I think it was just stuff they made up.
I think it was just stuff they made up because they didn't reference. They had mentioned, didn't they mention Ted Bundy and the Black Dahlia case?
Yeah, they mentioned a couple.
But I think that the locations they went to were fictional.
Yeah, were all fictional.
Which is like, there could have been something interesting there, almost like a Mindhunter thing, where if they would have, delved into it without being exploitative. But for me, a lot of this just felt like surface level serial killer stuff. It almost felt like just genre, like a genre film. Not really. It didn't really make you feel like a lot of it was well researched or anything, or something like Silence of the Lambs, where you feel like, oh man, this is like a deep dive. But yeah, a lot of it just felt kind of surface level to me, where it didn't feel like this was coming from a place of wanting to maybe explore those things a lot. It was more of like, what it would be interesting if this scenario occurred. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I do like that it kind of just takes its time, and it is like a road movie with a serial killer and that's somebody else that's interested. But a lot of that stuff too just felt like it was just so blatant, and then like the dichotomy between the two, and it's like, oh wait, he's realizing, he could be friends with a serial killer. Like even when it starts out, I think I messaged you guys where he talks about like never using a gun or never going to shoot anybody. Yeah. I was like, oh well, obviously at the end he's going to be forced to shoot him. It's like so much. He starts like talking like him when he comes out from the bar, and I don't know if there was a relevance to that, but Juliette Lewis, she got her hair cut and then made her hair like the other woman's. Like, I was like, is there supposed to be like this broad...
Well, Brad Pitt's character did that. He cut it because I guess he had...
But then she fixed her hair. Remember her?
Yeah, so
and that's when she started kind of rubbing off on her a little bit more about like having her...
Something I think that we were watching the movie, so there's a point where... So, the obvious plot point is that Brad Pitt is a killer. He has killed people, and he is violent. So they're going on this road trip to look at all these serial killer locations and historical places and things relevant to that, while unknowingly having a killer with them. And at one point, when David Duchovny's character is using a voice recorder to record some thoughts about something, Brad Pitt's like, oh, Black Dahlia, I can talk about that. And then he's basically just like, he thinks he's so smart, probably somewhere right now, basically giving his own internal thoughts and monologue on it.
About his own life, yeah.
But then, like, the funny...
But too, like, I don't think... I was waiting for something more insightful from that. And, like, the scene just ends. And I was like, well, that... I actually didn't, like, feel like I discovered anything or they were saying anything significant.
Well, the only thing I can think of is, and maybe it'd be intentional or not, is, like, maybe he just literally didn't have anything insightful to say.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, too, is, like... I'd read the book Manhunter and some other stuff from the guy that John Douglas that helped create like the FBI's profiling techniques or some of them. And Brad Pitt's character really isn't a serial killer because he doesn't have like an MO on how he kills or a signature to when he does it. He doesn't really have a specific way he likes to do it because like some like actual serial killers, like the BTK was like bind, torture, kill, had specific things he wanted to get out of it. As opposed to Brad Pitt just kind of kills people with whatever is available.
Is he a homicidal maniac?
He is, yeah. So he's killing for financial gain and just to keep, you know, status quo and to keep things moving along. So he kills people just to do it, to make things easy. And he doesn't really have like the compulsionary elements to it that a lot of the serial killers do. So I'm just wondering if how...
That's what kind of felt off about this to me. I don't know. Just something about it just felt like it really wasn't all the way there and feeling like almost like a complete real picture.
Yeah.
Like it was a fine scenario, but it just felt a bit empty on that side of it.
Well, the other question is, so like when they're going and investigating the murder locations or the historical like childhood homes of these serial killers, and they're trying to develop insight into what made them do it or how they operated. And Brad Pitt has no real insight to why he does it. He just kind of does it. Is that commenting on stuff like that? Or, you know, that David Duchovny's character is glorifying serial killers and wanting to put a lot of stuff there, as opposed to some people just have no empathy. And then, because I think Brad Pitt's character would just lack empathy maybe.
Since we're talking full of spoilers, it's like you sit there and you see the guy at one point they're getting fuel and it's his turn to pay.
And this is on Amazon Prime too, right?
Yeah,
in case you do want to stop and watch it.
And it takes a crime opportunity, goes in the bathroom and stabs him in the neck several times and just, you know, takes his money and all that. And it's the one thing you never see is like you never really see. I would like to see him evolve, and like every time they stopped, you see some like sociopathic tendencies. He steals the bag from the little girl at one point, and then. But you never really see him go from like a normal guy to just full blown.
Or escalation. Like there's no like, not that this film needs it, but there's no like ticking clock. There's no, and that would have maybe made it more, I guess, a standard Hollywood picture. But there's nothing like where the cops are maybe on Brad Pitt's trail and he's trying to keep things cool while nobody else knows what's going on. Like, and there was none of that. There's nothing that feels like. You know, there's nothing where he tells Juliette Lewis like, oh, when we get to California, we're going to kill them or something. There's nothing where you feel like David Duchovny and them are really in that much danger. Yeah. There's like the threat, like the sexual threat, you know, the way he looks at Forbes.
Yeah.
Looks at her and stuff. But it kind of just, you're kind of just watching it unfold, and there's not really, I didn't feel much tension there.
Yeah, and one thing I would have liked to see is like
compared to something, you know.
Yeah. And I don't want to just. I've been talking about this movie a lot, but like you look at like The Shining, you look at Jack Torrance from the beginning to the end, where you can see the break, you can see the normal. He starts off still off, but throughout the film,
well, that's normally what you want is a character change throughout a film.
And with this is you get Brad Pitt at the very beginning. And he's always off, and you know he's kind of like that.
And I guess because David Duchovny is the main character, but he's the least interesting one.
Well, because he gives a very
his character has very little to offer, and it would have been different too if they played him more to where like he idolizes Brad Pitt's character because he's everything he can't be, and he knows that he can't be that. So he kind of is a what would you say he. Like aids him, not in a way, but somebody doesn't. I can't think of the right word here.
He idolizes him.
No, idolizes.
Kind of.
But like, if you have like an alcoholic person, you know, but you let him
enabler.
Drink. He's an enabler.
Yeah.
If they let him be an enabler, like he kind of would start the bar.
Oh, there's people that are that are obsessed with me.
So basically,
so he was more of an enabler of him, but maybe didn't even like maybe Stockholm syndrome a little bit.
So or
there's a good premise
here. Spoiler for Halloween 2018. If he was more like the Doctor from Halloween of I want to see the beast in the wild and see how this actually works.
Yeah, something like that.
But then I think if you do that, you kind of lose any moral grounding for your character, and they're not really easy to. But I think in the mid '90s, they probably still wanted you to have like an anchored protagonist that you.
Yeah, but I mean, Natural Born Killers came out and they were awful.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
But I'm saying, like, but the grounding character wouldn't have been Duchovny; it would have been his girlfriend in the film, and that would have been your moral compass. The person's like, okay, this is right, this is wrong. And you do a shift from him to her.
Which she did try to bring him back even.
And I think that would have been a more interesting film because throughout the point, she knew it was off. She didn't like it. She was the one saying, "We don't do this. We don't do this."
And it's easy to say like what they should have done, but basically the whole point of being like having these other opinions on it was that like what they did do wasn't interesting enough. You know what I mean? Like the film there is not.
It's like something. It's like you've mentioned. Like at one point in the movie, Juliette Lewis's character has her hair cut to look like Michelle Forbes' character, and Brad Pitt cut it himself to make it look more similar. And it's like this weird kind of flirtation or obsession with her because you see him like looking at her a lot. Something that like throughout the movie at one point when Michelle Forbes' character sees like a newscast saying they're looking for early and they give like a description and his girlfriend and stuff. And they mentioned like her having long brown hair. I was like, oh, did he actually do that to make her less recognizable?
That's what I thought whenever she came with her haircut.
But then, like, the fact that he didn't do anything to himself. It's like, so I thought it would have been really interesting is if he had trimmed his beard and cut his hair to look more like Duchovny. So that would have been, And then it's basically trying to act like if you had this weird thing where he's trying to make them look more like Duchovny and his girlfriend and Michelle Forbes, while Duchovny becomes kind of like man crushed on him because he's masculine and cool and doesn't have pretension or care. It'd be like a weird kind of dichotomy.
I would like to have seen a Michael Scott Ryan relationship in this film where Duchovny wants to be like the other guy. So in the movie
who's Ryan?
Ryan is the temp that he's like obsessed with.
It's like that Michael like stares at all the time, and whenever he sees him do anything stylistically, does the exact same thing.
It would have been funny though at the end of the movie, Brad Pitt's character was like clean shaven and had 2 ear piercings and had his hair short, and Duchovny's got the beard and the long hair. There's a lot of interesting stuff that could be in the movie. I just feel like with Duchovny in it, just like you said.
Well, I think too that the structure of it being they're doing a road trip that lasts like maybe a week. You kind of give it a limited timeline. So not a ton of development is going to happen on a character over the course of a week like that.
I mean, but plenty of films are set during 24 hours and plenty of development happens.
Well, yeah,
you know what I mean?
I mean, just like in terms of like a lot of the things we're talking about, be like if it was a longer trip.
Yeah.
But in terms of like what it is, like Duchovny kind of gives a flat performance, but I mean that's kind of like
I don't know if there's much for his character.
Well, I think with him, like he is very good when properly directioned and kind of given an arc that makes sense for him. He can do very well, and he can be perfect in a lot of things. But I think that with this, he played what was probably written pretty well. Just there wasn't a lot of development on that character. Just kind of the straight man in the story that has his beliefs tested and has to decide. Are serial killers or killers just generally bad people that you can kill? Or are they to be pitied because they have, developmental issues and a terrible background and social, development? So there's all these things that kind of come back around. But I don't know if it gives short shrift to the Michelle Forbes character because she's essentially used as an exclamation point on driving him to be like, okay, we should kill some people. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of one of those things where she got to be involved in. So like the story, they go on the road trip as they're going along. Brad Pitt's killing people to get money, whatever. At one point, Brad Pitt and David Duchovny go to a bar together to play pool. And then you find out more of the background on Juliette Lewis's character. And you find out that, he'll beat her sometimes if she does things that he doesn't like, if she's not supposed to smoke or drink or cuss. She's looking through some of the pictures that Michelle Forbes' character are taking because she's a photographer. And then some of them like nude photos and modeling and stuff. She's like, oh, if there's a picture like this of me, early beat me black and blue. So it kind of gives you a little bit of hint into what's going on. But she has like this very traumatic backstory of being like gang raped as a child. And she basically is just with him because, and part of it too, did that influence her developmental issues? Or, at least if not cause them, worsen them, because that can happen to a lot of people, cause like a regression to be more childlike. So she's basically just with him because he is kind of like an alpha male defender that she sees as someone who wouldn't let that happen again. So no matter what he does to her, it's not as bad as what happened to her prior. So it's this very sad portrait of her life. And then her mom is against it because he just got out of prison. So you didn't really know that. You knew that he had a parole officer. But the story of why he was in prison keeps changing. It was that he stole a car, that he had a gun.
How did I get these scars?
Yeah, and then the parole officer is like, I don't really get it.
I like that he was just the weirdest character in the movie.
I kind of feel like this is like, what movie was it with Richard Pryor and Superman?
Superman 4.
Okay.
4. 3. No, 3. Because 4 was the nuclear thing. Nuclear.
This is a little tangent, but if you ever watch a movie, there's a part where he wears a red cowboy hat. And at the time, he's Richard Pryor. He do whatever he wanted. And he was going to wear that red cowboy hat, and he wore it, and there wasn't anything he could do. He's like, I'm wearing it in the scene, I'm doing it. And I kind of feel like the guy that was the pro officer, like, walked through the set design. I was like, I want to wear that hook. And I'm like, what? He's like, I'm wearing that damn hook on my hand. Because, like, it makes no sense in the context of the rest of the film.
And he has bad teeth.
This guy would even be a pro officer. Yeah. And there's nothing else in the movie that even... So I feel like he was just walking through the prop department, like, I want to wear that hook.
Well, too, this was from a music video director that directed this. So he might have just, like, started going wild, like, oh, we're going to have, like, just thinking visually, like, oh, the pro officer, like, he's not all good either. Let's give him a hook. You know what I mean? Like, could have been that one. Or he was on board for it because he was, like, ready to go out. I just feel like
he's walking through the prop department and is like, I want that hook. And, like, somebody was actually using it. He's like, no, I want your hook for the scene.
Because, like, it's the electrician. He's like, give me that.
Because that character, we just talked about Rob Zombie movies a couple days ago. Would that character fit right perfectly? If you just took this guy out of that movie and dropped him.
I forgot about him.
So Brad Pitt
broke this film up, so he's not in the end of it.
So Brad Pitt, he's in the midway point. Yeah. So Brad Pitt gets visited by his parole officer who has a hook hand. One hand has the prosthetic hook and one is uninjured or whatever. He has like very like grimy, bad looking teeth, and he has like sideburns and seems kind of like a big character. Seems like a character, like you said, out of a Rob Zombie movie or even like a Tarantino movie or something like out of Twin Peaks or something, just like these really weird characters.
He didn't fit. There's nothing about that character that fit in this movie.
I guess the implication was he was just kind of like a slimy parole officer.
He would have been creepy in the city streets of the movie Seven. And that whole film feels grimier than this one.
He's just this kind of weird,
let alone this film,
one-off character that has like a hook hand, bad teeth, and just seems kind of off. But the only purpose that he plays is to let you know that Brad Pitt has a parole officer, and then like midway through the movie, they find the dead body of his landlord that he buried out back. So that's like the big reveal that he's a killer. But I mean, the movie heavily hints up to that point that it happened, and then the premise of the movie tells you that.
That's
happens.
A weird, like,
he kills two people at the beginning of the movie to get shoes, or it just maybe that happens that way, but.
It's just like it has like these kind of weird non sequiturs for that because the parole officer doesn't track them down across the country.
No, he just doesn't care. But
he's like, oh, I think he might be going to Texas.
Yeah, like it's just to me, like I feel like if he was in like The Hills Have Eyes,
he's like halfway there to Chop Shop. Like
Well, I think like in one of those movies, like he'd be like a villainous kind of guy that would like take the protagonist down the.
I think his literally only purpose in this is to let the police know that that Early likely will end up in Texas because when they see a newscast later, they said they think he's heading towards Texas. Yeah. So I guess that's the only thing.
But it just feels very weird, given how this movie's played, to have this bombastic, like bigger than life character.
But I guess though, if you reverse engineer it though, if a guy kills a couple people in Kentucky and goes on the run, there's no reason to air anything about it on the local news in Texas.
Yeah.
So they had to make that connection be he was telling his parole officer he wanted to go to Texas. Yeah. So that way later in the movie it would make sense to be a newscast that came on.
Yeah, but
because otherwise
you never really find out where he killed that guy. He could have killed him in Texas. Like, does it say where he killed him at? Because it never really.
I don't remember. It probably did.
No, it ended in Texas, I think, because
it ended in Texas.
You're talking about the gas station.
Yeah, where
right?
he killed. Because that's what they were talking about, was that gas station murder. So
yeah, I think it was supposed to be in. Well, I guess that would be.
Texas is a big state.
Yeah.
But I guess, too, like, you have the element of they would have, I don't know. I mean, maybe they knew that he was on the run and likely headed there.
Yeah.
And then when they saw the footage of the gas station, they were able to piece together that it was him because it's just like some crystal clear HD footage from that security cameras they really didn't have in the 90s. I mean, even today, a lot of times, if you go to like security camera footage and stuff, it looks like they shot it on a potato.
Yeah. And then they also had the scene where the guy was using the bathroom. I guess he had like a catheter or something. Yeah. So there's just these little weird,
interesting flair. Yeah. You know what I mean? Just
there's these little weird touches they'll throw in the movie that just seem on and off.
Well, yeah, but like you have
it makes them interesting though. Yeah. At least it's not. You know what I mean? It's just. Not everything's as expected.
Well, because then you have the scene where Brad Pitt and David Duchovny go to the bar, which is kind of like an out-of-the-way kind of redneck bar that's probably still very much like places you could go to today. And Duchovny goes in, and there's a guy that's flirting with the waitress, and I guess Duchovny kind of sees that and laughs. And then immediately the guy goes up and starts calling. He's like, "Oh, are you gay?"
No, what he laughed about was she brought him the wrong beer, and then he's like, "It's supposed to be lucky beer." She's like, "Is there anything lucky in here?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I guess not."
Okay, but the guy thought he was laughing at his misfortune seconds before. And it's just one of those things like that is still very real. People jump up and like, "Oh, are you gay? Is that your boyfriend?" Yeah. And then Brad Pitt immediately is like, "Oh, this ain't the right beer," and smashes both of them in the guy's face. Yeah. And it's like the kind of place that happens and they don't kick everybody out and call the cops.
Well, he started it, so they just drug the guy off and started it.
And then he kicks him in the nuts as he's leaving.
So they're like, but that was like...
I wonder if the kicking in the nuts was improvised by Brad Pitt too, because that seems like it was just...
Yeah, well, it's just funny because like that's, in place where that's fine. So like, okay, well, he started it, so they even...
I mean, because I've been at like, not recently, but I remember going to a bar... that we walked in and somebody wasn't even wearing like a dress shirt. It was just kind of like a plaid short sleeve button down over a band shirt. And the guy at the door who's wearing like a cowboy hat was like, "Man, if I didn't know you, I think you're gay. I wouldn't let you in." And it's like, this was in 2009, so not that long ago. And it's like, so that stuff still exists. Like that is how people operate. And two, like you had David Duchovny in that movie. He had like the little earrings on both ears, I guess trying to be edgy. Edgy for the early 90s. Like in today's world, you would have him have like, full sleeve tattoos and a big beard or something.
He would just look like Jared Leto from Suicide Squad.
But yeah,
David Duchovny is Jared Leto's
But
Joker.
so like that's actually, so I think where the movie really...
He plays a straight character. Like he's just a normal guy, but that's how he looks.
When the movie really hits its stride is kind of in that section when you hear the backstory about Juliette Lewis's character. And then you see like Brad Pitt kind of take David or enthrall David Duchovny and make him kind of think of him as cool. That's where the movie really hits its sweet spot. If it operated more in that type of stuff, there'd be a lot more investment in what happens later on.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of payoff in the film. Yeah. Like there's some obvious setup and payoff that's just like, okay, like a David Duchovny, like, oh, you shouldn't use a gun. Like there's that stuff that's just like very broad. But like, there's not a lot of like, it's a lot of this happens and then this happens and then this happens. Not because this happens, then this happens and then this happens. Like there's not a lot of building escalation, until like that point to where things start getting revealed. And
then like the big breaking point is when Michelle Forbes' character sees Brad Pitt and Juliette Lewis' characters having sex in the car. And then at that point, she decides they gotta go.
No, well, she's taking pictures of it.
Yeah.
And then
Brad Pitt sees her.
Brad Pitt sees her and then just stares at her, and that's when she's like, "Okay, this is it."
But here's the thing, though: she was she was in the wrong for taking pictures. She was staring at the
film first, taking pictures.
But then, like the thing is, like she's like, "Next gas station, we're dumping them." So I would have thought it'd been more like, "Hey, y'all go in and pay for gas," but instead, maybe there wasn't like a discussion between her and him. Because if I'm giving people a cross-country ride and I'm ditching them at a gas station, I don't plan on seeing them
conversation again. If I think he's a serial killer or something.
I'm going to be like, "Hey, man, if y'all go in there real quick, pay for gas and do your thing, and then as soon as they hit the door, just drive off." But in this case, he's like very cordially telling them that they got catch. And it's like, do you really think that was going to end well? Like, I know that they did it for the movie, but that's where the movie kind of goes off.
Well, and to the Brad, so the the Brad Pitt Duchovny conversation happens off camera.
Yeah.
Because you see Brad Pitt go in and he's really mad because he knows they're not getting to go with them, or they've been kicked off the trip, so he knows the direction things are going in. And then Duchovny tells Juliette Lewis's character, he's like, "Oh, it's not you all, it's just something between me and her," and. Like you said, if they had just dumped him there, the movie ends.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if they keep killing people and come back into contact with them at some point.
Well, they could have been a chase. They could have chased them. That's what I figured. That's how it would probably went.
I think what would have been more interesting is, like, since Brad Pitt's looked at the maps and stuff, he knows where they're going. Is for them to dump them off.
He'd immediately,
and then while they're there, you could have the same setup happen, but then he runs into him, and then it's like, okay, now he's fully unhinged. You're no longer buddies. That connection they had at the bar and all those places that's severed, that's gone. I think I would have liked to see.
Again, that's not the film they made, but because we're talking about all this stuff, it's like, obviously we're not like super impressed with, you know what I mean? Like what this film gave us. It's interesting, it's an interesting film, but it also feels very, this film does not feel timeless. It even just like just so much of this film feels dated, and not just the look of it, but just the way they handle the serial killer stuff and all that. You know what I mean? Like, it feels dated. It does not feel. I don't think you could take this same script and make it today, and it feel like a great movie.
Well, and two, the thing that could provide a lot of tension for the movie and set up an entire sequence is playing off of David Duchovny's character becoming, a fan of and kind of, impressed by and whatever by Brad Pitt's character. So you could have the dual element of, this person he's kind of admiring and emulating, playing off of, will they find out? Like, there's all these things they could have played up a lot, Brad Pitt kills because there's the one scene where he kills the guy in the bathroom with like the little knife, and Duchovny's gonna go use the bathroom. He's like, oh man, don't go in there. There's no sink. It's a big mess. Like, if you had played up the elements of that more, where there's more of the tension going back and forth of, will he find out this person he's kind of idolizing now is actually a terrible killer? Or like
that's where I'm confused on this film, because it feels like it wants to be almost just kind of a crowd pleaser in that regards. But sometimes it feels like it's also wanting to be something different, but it never does enough of the different stuff well enough to where it's like, what do you want to be? Did they fail at doing that stuff, or do they intentionally want to avoid what you expect? But either way, like, they didn't succeed. Like, they should have went further in that stuff, or further and executed the kind of unexpected things better. I think
part of it too is starting development on it in like 89, 90, stuff like that. I think you would definitely, if you were doing this exact same movie today, it would be handled much differently. And instead of being like a writer and a photographer, they'd be a podcasting team or something.
But
but the photographer part could still be the same.
But you would handle it differently, because I think that in the early 90s, the pop culture was also supposed to be a critique of true crime obsession, even in the 80s and 90s. So that was much less of pop culture then than it is today. So I think it was also meant to be kind of not so much being a huge, deep David Fincher type deep dive into serial killers, but also more of kind of hey, the guys that are obsessed with this, the guys and girls and people and whoever that are obsessed with this, maybe there's a little bit wrong with them too.
But they didn't do enough.
But they didn't really talk. The only thing they did was they exposed the kind of like, I hate to use these terms, like the liberal elite that's like, oh, we're not going to resort to violence and they deserve rehabilitation because it's, nature and nurture combined to turn them into this. And then by the end of the movie, you turn them into, well, no, I'm going to put a gun to his head and kill him, even though the cops are on the way and he's not a danger to me anymore.
I could be getting this confused, but I think what would be kind of interesting too is talking about like showing the obsession of the true crime stuff with Duchovny. I think at the end of the movie, if you still kind of feel like his character may become unhinged a little bit. So let's just say that.
Well, there was an episode of The X-Files that even did a better deep dive into that.
What I'm saying is, like, I could be getting this wrong, but I'm pretty sure when Bonnie and Clyde were murdered, that people like, because that, we say, we don't realize how big true crime was then too, because people were like trying to get to the car and somebody cut one of their fingers off and kept it. And like they were taking pieces of skin and hair to hold on to. So it would be kind of interesting is you go back to the beginning of the movie, Brad Pitt cuts a guy's finger off to take the ring. Full circle, Duchovny cuts his finger off, keeps the ring, and it's in his, he's like, wow, he's
there was not enough.
But I'm saying, but that would have been like something that was big, kind of a nice full little, or like when
closure on it.
Yeah, when his girlfriend comes in from singing, or swimming, and she's talking to him, he kind of has the door open, and maybe you keep a glimpse of it, and he shuts the door, and they go,
well,
and that would have been kind of like a nice.
Something too that
that's full circle.
So you understand that they find out that Brad Pitt's character has been killing people. He is not necessarily a serial killer, but he is a murderer. He is a straight up murderer who just kills people for personal gain or whatever. And then it's implied, or I don't know, it's pretty heavily shown that he raped Michelle Forbes' character overnight when she's locked up on the bed. So it doesn't explicitly state that's exactly what happened, but her reaction and the David Duchovny seeing her be like, you bastard, immediately getting upset about it, basically makes it where that's what happened. Yeah. But then at the end, David Duchovny shoots him in the chest or whatever, and he's been hit in the face with a shovel that kind of messed his face up, and then he gets hit in the throat or face again by Michelle Forbes' character, and then the police are on their way, and he's on the floor and he's like touching Duchovny's face, but it doesn't seem like there's any force behind it. It's just kind of like on his face. Duchovny puts the gun under his chin and shoots and kills him by blowing his brains at the top of his head. It seems like even back then they would have been like, oh, you just executed him. Even though he's disabled, you execute him. Now, you could play it off and say he was still struggling and trying to grab my face, and all that stuff. And since it's the 90s and it's a serial killer, but it seems like there'd be more suspicion on you traveling cross country.
Depending on what law enforcement we're looking into it.
Yeah.
Like, you can forget William. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, there are a lot of decisions get made. Like,
But two, you got to think.
It's like, case solved.
Exactly.
But you could always say, hey, we didn't know who they were, and we picked them up at hitchhikers.
This college-educated guy with no rap sheet whatsoever killed a heinous murderer that kidnapped him and raped his girlriend.
Yeah.
Case closed.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I don't know. In the real world, I think most people would still probably be like, because there's the stories where somebody finds, I think it was like in Texas, some guy walked in and there was like a transient that was in their barn assaulting his kid, and he like beat him to death with his fist.
And they got to quit. Yeah.
And then the jury's just like, nope.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what was the McConaughey Samuel Jackson movie that is essentially about that? The Samuel Jackson.
Time to
Kill.
Yeah, that's the entire movie.
Like, they deserve to die, and I hope they burn in hell.
I mean,
and it plays with that debate, but this doesn't have, I don't know. It just,
this has elements of that, but it doesn't. It just kind of touches the surface of it.
Nothing feels formed. It feels like they had a okay premise, some good actors, and then they just kind of went with it. And they didn't take it all the way.
Yeah.
Well, because too, I'd watched Black Klansman recently too, the Spike Lee movie, because it was leaving HBO this month.
I'm glad you guys finally watched it.
So we finally watched it, and it's like just seeing them dive more into the way like a criminal, California just seems like a serial killer film made before those movies really got into the nitty gritty. If you had this
exactly, that's what I'm saying.
So if you had made this movie in the 90s with the same cast and had David Fincher direct it, you get a completely different movie. And it's not saying that they did a bad job.
Fincher wouldn't have directed this script. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would have been completely
That's what
different.
I'm saying. This script now, it feels so dated. And I don't mean their job roles, just it feels so surface level.
Yeah, but I kind of like it though, because this definitely is the 90s.
Yes, yeah.
And from the haircuts, especially on, I can't think of the actress's name or her character, but
Michelle Forbes.
Michelle Forbes has the ultimate 90s haircut.
The Amelie haircut.
Which I like. Yeah, because I was a 90s kid. That was the hottest looking women.
But it's just funny because I was kid. When you think of that, you think of Pulp Fiction, because I think that's just such an iconic poster with her on there. And but anyway, I really like the aesthetic, and then you have the annoying 90s friends that the company's talking to at the beginning of the movie. And it's just the generic, 90s friends.
I'm just sad this movie didn't have any Nine Inch Nails on the soundtrack.
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't really have any music in it, did it?
If this came out in the late 90s, it would have had a soundtrack filled with nu metal bands and Korn and Slipknot and stuff.
I wonder what the budget was for this.
It was
they changed Box Office Mojo, by the way. Did you all see that?
Yeah, they changed it. So I think the movie initially was going the budget was I think between $5 and $8 million. So kind of a mid to low budget movie for that era, but still not nothing.
Worldwide gross, which I guess it was just released domestically, or there's only domestic totals. About 2,395,000.
I think the budget was somewhere between 5 and 8, maybe 7. Because I think it started out the budget and they increased it a little bit.
How do you get the budget? There we go. How do you get the budget details on this, or is it not on?
I just read it on on Wikipedia.
I didn't know if it was hidden on the new Box Office Mojo that is not as good as the old one. Yeah,
they really kind of screwed the pooch on how they set all that up. Because according to according to IMDb, the budget's listed estimated at $9 million. So
that's a pretty decent sized budget.
So
which you wonder though too, where'd the money go when you watch this movie? Because it's
the hook cost a lot of money.
Yeah,
I think the base. Well, you have to. I think it was in development for a long time with script writing and stuff. So it's probably money just to keep people attached, and probably wasted money on pre-production. But then in the 90s, the baseline to even make a cinematic looking movie was probably at least $5 million.
Yeah. I will say though that even if the movies aren't necessarily the best overall, it still looks good. The cinematography's fine.
Yeah. He had done mainly music videos before that, I think, and then afterwards. He did some films that I have not. Whiteout, Swordfish, Gone in 60 Seconds.
Swordfish and Gone in 60 Seconds. Yeah, you can definitely kind of feel that vibe in it.
And then before that, he did a bunch of Janet Jackson music videos.
Swordfish and Gone in 60 Seconds aren't bad movies. They're fine.
Well, Swordfish is very much a movie of the time.
I never watched either one of those to completion. I've only seen parts on TV.
I've seen Gone in 60 Seconds.
John Travolta in his post-Pulp Fiction comeback.
Yeah.
But
it was like Hugh Jackman and Halle Berry. It's only famous for like one scene.
Yeah, but I guess we can kind of go into.
I've seen that scene.
We can go into our.
That's what I was like. Was like on TV in that era.
We can go into our reviews for this in terms of what we're giving this out of 10.
I mean, like, I'm going to say, like, it's not a bad movie. It's like a 7 out of 10. Like, it's not something I would seek to watch again. But if it's
necessarily recommend it, at least I wouldn't recommend it.
But it's like, it's fine enough watching it. It's just kind of forgettable, I guess. But outside of, if you, having Brad Pitt, Juliette Lewis, and David Duchovny help it a lot. Because, I think all those actors went on to be probably a lot bigger than they were at the time, especially Brad Pitt. So going back and watching that, like Brad Pitt was still he was
entertaining.
He's still a very
because Brad Pitt, you've had him in worldwide blockbusters. He's been in World War Z that made a bunch of movie worldwide. He's been in Troy and the Ocean's movies, and then Oscar films. Just in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with Tarantino and Inglourious Basterds. So he's been in critically acclaimed and very successful films. And then David Duchovny, the X-Files became a huge phenomenon. And then he's, had the Californication. So he's worked very consistently since then. Juliette Lewis has been in a bunch of stuff. Michelle Forbes was in a bunch of different stuff. So everybody went on
but they're all losers because they've never been in a Marvel film.
Duchovny was considered for the Hulk when they were recasting.
He wasn't Norton.
Actually, you're wrong, Sean, because Pitt was in Deadpool 2.
He was?
Yeah.
He was the invisible guy. They got electrocuted.
Small cameo, but he was in Deadpool 2 for like 2 seconds.
Yeah. Well, that's not part of the MCU. That wasn't then part of the MCU. It is now.
So if I was giving this movie a score rating it like on today's scale, it's probably like a 6 or something. I don't know. Like at the time it came out, it was probably more like the people who, when I first saw it, I remember liking it more. So there'd been like, when I first saw it, it was like a 7 or 8 out of 10. But then after you've seen so many shows and movies focus on serial killers and true crime stuff, it's funny this is still a topic of like the obsession with true crime. But everything's cyclical. Yeah. But I think there's been so much content or so many movies and shows and things made in this vein since then.
There's a podcast we've done. It's a Sigourney Weaver film that's kind of similar.
Yeah, I was something like that with Julie because she watched this with me.
And to me, it's very similar in that because like Brad Pitt.
And what was the name of that film?
I cannot think of it. I'd have to look it up. But you have there's like the crazy serial killer guy.
I like that one better.
You like that one better? See, I like this one better because I feel like Brad Pitt's character was a little bit better than the villain in that one. Even though
but just something about that.
Copycat.
Only because that one felt. I don't know. I just enjoyed watching that one. This one, I remember a lot of stuff from that film, even though it did feel very it felt very constructed. Like, let's make a serial killer film. And this, I kind of see why this film is forgettable. Like, I give it like a 6 out of 10 probably as well, just because like as much as like it's fine to watch and you enjoy the performances, like there's nothing this film like says or does that makes you think like it's going to stick with me, I don't think. So I see why this kind of fell out of public
another movie. So this and another
feels a bit empty.
So I saw both this and another movie. I think this is on like USA used to have the Up All Nights, the different marathons. And it was when they had like the Japanese hosts that were dubbed over with American voices.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
So I think there was like within a weekend I had seen this movie California and then another movie Clay Pigeons. Clay Pigeons had Joaquin Phoenix, Vince Vaughn, Janine Garofalo, and somebody else. And that was another one I like to go back at some point that, involves like kind of serial killer stuff. That one was more of kind of like the post Kevin Smith Tarantino style film that was Vince Vaughn and Joaquin Phoenix and stuff.
The thing I remember most about that TV show you're talking about is they had a marathon where they had all the speeds or something. And then they had one scene where like 2 buses hit and they just kept doing it back and forth so it looked like they were humping. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that scene. I had forgot all about that show until later.
I just remember that show because that was one of the first things I watched and they're like, look at these buses hump. And they're like,
I guess so. So there was like, there were English-speaking people dubbing over, right?
Yeah, it was like a
that's
Japanese.
Extremely racist, right?
Yes, it wouldn't fly today. Well, and the stuff they were saying, so it was like a Japanese host of some show, they just dubbed over with American voices, making it ridiculous. Because for the movie Clay Pigeons, they were like, "Oh, it's gay pigeons."
Yeah, because it's also kind of like the old. So they used to show on the video game TV show, whatever. Tech TV. They used to have like where the Asian people would do the obstacle courses, and they dubbed over with English.
Ninja Warrior?
No. It was like
Most Extreme Challenge.
Yeah, it's Most Extreme. Yeah, it's kind of
so stuff
like that.
Stuff that wouldn't fly today, even if it's a relatively innocuous joke about.
But the Most Extreme Challenge, if they were at least like translating them, I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea. But this is what it reminds me of.
But just like, so these are movies I had seen back at a period of time over a decade ago. So like, I would like to do that Clay Pigeons at some point, but it's not on the streaming services. You have to buy it on disc, and I don't think they even have a Blu-ray of it. But yeah, so just kind of like a slice of 90s. So it's on Amazon Prime. If you haven't seen it, you still don't see it without spoiling all the plot details. But yeah, so you can. I guess that wrap up our discussion of Kalifornia with the K. You can find all the stuff we're doing at hbtvs.com. Find links to all the social media accounts and all the content we're releasing. Do us a huge favor. Leave us a review via whatever podcasting app you're listening to. Or if you're on YouTube, we enjoy seeing comments or questions or things like that. So I guess that'll wrap up this episode of the House with Sir podcast. Thanks for listening.